All right, what's up, everybody? Elijah Campbell here from 107.5 The Game. I should technically say good morning because over on the East Coast, we are officially into tomorrow, a very late night of the first night of the SEC tournament. And there's really no better way to start this off than talk about the Gamecocks season ending after a 72-68 loss to Arkansas. And, of course, this broadcast brought to you by our friends over at Columbia Craft and Peak Drift. Honestly, after a long day's work, I practice what I preach here. So we have cracked open a can of Columbia Craft Famously Hop. It's my favorite beer on the planet. I'm not just saying that because they're an advertiser. I'm saying that because it is one of the best IPAs you could possibly have. So think of this as, like a post-basketball chill-out sesh. I will unleash the notebook, everything that I observed from day one of the SEC tournament, an SEC tournament that I think we can all come to a reasonable conclusion is the best conference basketball tournament that we've seen maybe in the history of college basketball. So if anybody is awake to watch this live, feel free to chime in on the chat. I'll answer any questions. I know probably not. And a lot of you will be watching this whenever it goes onto the YouTube page at the conclusion of the stream because, again, it's late. So if you're joining me, you're either just a massive hoop head like myself, a night owl, or both. So if you do tune in, thanks for joining along with me. Thanks for watching tomorrow, all that good stuff. And we'll go ahead and just break it down. Arkansas 72, South Carolina 68. The first half, back and forth until it got ugly. Arkansas had two 13-2 runs and ultimately resulted in a 17-point halftime lead. And defensively, the things that went right for you at CLA in the meeting on March 1st did not go right this afternoon. Arkansas, yes, hit a lot of shots. When I was talking to Zach Davis in the locker room after the game, that's the one thing he mentioned is that they just hit more. They hit shots. They hit some tough shots in the first half. But the thing that Lamont Paris mentioned after the game, when kind of reflecting on that first half and maybe some things that went differently in this meeting as opposed to the one at CLA where Carolina just beat Arkansas like a drum, was that Arkansas was able to really command the ball screen. Right, they got into their ball screen. South Carolina was a little out of position. At least, Lamont's evaluation was that they were out of position, which led to a couple of lob plays at the rim, led to a couple of easy looks that, quite frankly, Arkansas just didn't have in the last meeting. And they were able to utilize some of the athleticism of their forwards, even though the forwards aren't maybe as physical as a lot of the other, forwards and centers in the SEC. They were still able to get a lot of looks at the basket, still able to get the shots they wanted. And then they even got into their floater game a little bit. DJ Wagner, John L. Davis got into maybe their hot scoring spots a lot easier in the first half, but it tightened up in the second because what once turned into a 20-point lead for Arkansas dwindled down to 1 in the back end of the second half. South Carolina did a hell of a job getting it to the an 8-point deficit at the under 8, and slowly, death by paper cuts type beat on their way to making it a 1-point game, but can never really get over the hump. I thought Colin played fantastic, especially defensively. Him and Jamari are really the catalyst of that comeback. You look at exactly the adjustment that was made from half 1 to half 2. Lamont mentioned that pick and roll defense that I was alluding to earlier, which is kind of what led to Arkansas having such a big first half. They tightened up, and a lot of that was help side defense too. He said that a lot of the help in those ball screens were a little out of position. They were a little late getting over, and that's what kind of frees up a lob, right? A lob frees up when the help side on the on the baseline doesn't move over in time to maybe meet the roller to the basket. And an example as to why it worked so much better in the second half was you saw Arkansas turn the ball over a lot more on post-entry passes off of those ball screens, right? So either John L. Davis, DJ Wagner, even Billy Richmond would take those ball screens and try to lob it into the post. Maybe not necessarily like for a lob dunk, but maybe just to get the ball past the defender of the roller. But the help side was there, almost cut off the route to the basket, and those passes would end up being a little too high because the defense just met the roller at the right place at the right time. Sometimes help defense can just be a game of inches and just being at the right place the right time on a basketball floor. And Carolina did that fantastically in the second half, and it created a lot of turnovers. It created some live ball opportunities for them to be able to get buckets in the fast break because the half-court offense – quite frankly, it's not been great all year, and it's been really the Achilles heel. This is where they've committed most of their turnovers is in the half court, and they're just not an efficient basketball team on the offensive side of the floor in that half court, in those half court sets. So when they're able to get out and transition, get easier buckets that way by forcing turnovers, this team's at its best. This team is then maximizing its offense, and they did a really good job of doing that today. When you look at some of the key moments in this game that maybe prevented them from being able to take a lead, Nick Pringle, as good as he was in the first meeting against Arkansas, was not able to take advantage of the physicality matchup or advantage that he has over some of South Carolina's forwards. Missed some shots around the rim, had a pass that Colin, off of a short roll, was able to find him cutting baseline, and just wasn't ready for the pass. He catches that pass, he scores. Carolina would then take their first lead of the game if that were to have happened, or first lead since early in the first half. And who knows what happens from there. It was a crucial turnover at a really bad time. And despite all that, it's still a 1-point game with under 2 minutes left, and they force Arkansas to shoot a really bad, low-quality three-pointer. It misses. Jordan Butler's got both hands, both two large mittens that he's got on the basketball, and Zvonimir Trevin Brazil kind of wrestles it from his hands, finds DJ Wagner, and DJ Wagner's not going to miss two of those in a row. And he banged one home, made it a 4-point game. And at that point, it was, in a multiple possession game where the offenses are both kind of stagnant in a second half, a 4-point lead could feel like 10. And sitting there courtside, it certainly felt like that 4-point lead was a 10-point lead, and it felt a little insurmountable from there. But a tough way for the season to end. I don't foresee them playing in the NIT. The way the players talked after the game, it felt like this was a conclusion to the season. There was some real finality to what happened today, especially with how Coach Paris talked in the postgame. There's a lot of reflection on the season, and now really the headline of this team comes to who's coming back next year. The biggest question is going to be Colin Murray-Boyles. Does he stay in college for one more year, or does he forego the rest of his eligibility and go to the NBA? Because as of right now, he's projected to be within the top 10 to 20 picks. I don't foresee him cracking top 10, but I can see him getting in the lottery. I know a lot of teams are really high on him, and I don't see him falling past 20. So that pay scale can get him $3 to $5 million. Would South Carolina be able to match that? I mean, the NIL portion of this is going to get better. I've heard from trusted sources that the NIL portion is going to get better. They're going to have more money to work with, but are they going to have enough to work with to make a competitive offer to detour Colin Murray-Boyles from going into the NBA? I don't think it's likely. But at the same time, I've also been told he loves college. He's really enjoying the environment. He enjoys being a student. There is, some family connection back in Columbia. Obviously, he's a Columbia, South Carolina native, so he's got reasons to stay home. There's a lot of reasons for him to stay. But if you just look at it from a career standpoint, the earlier you get to the NBA, the earlier you can get to the second contract, and the earlier you get to the second contract, the earlier you can get to the third, and then ultimately those contracts add up, and then your career earnings ultimately over the course of time maximizes itself, and you get to make the most out of your NBA experience. So I don't know. I'm leaning 80% that, Colin will not be suiting up for the South Carolina Gamecocks next season. And I feel pretty confident about that. When it comes to Nick Pringle, he told me he is going to be talking with Coach Paris in detail about what the role is going to be, what the team's going to look like. They're going to have a close conversation about what the future might hold. I think that one may be a little more of a 50-50 proposition. If anything, I actually might not be surprised at all to see Nick Pringle back in a South Carolina Gamecock jersey next year. And then Miles Stute, obviously for those who've been keeping up with his team all year, Miles, after the Mississippi State game, was diagnosed with blood clots, and he has not played since. He has applied for the waiver to give him another year of eligibility, that medical waiver. They're in the process of it. All the paperwork is filed. It's in on deadline. And now he's just kind of in that waiting area. So we'll see. He wasn't, when I asked him for an update, if he even got an update, right? He says he doesn't even have a real update right now, that everything's really just under review. So Miles Studi being in a Gamecock jersey next year is kind of just contingent on the mercy that the NCAA might have. It's kind of in their hands right now, which is really unfortunate for Gamecock fans and for Miles, who I'm sure would love to extend his college playing career. I know would love to extend his college playing career. And for Lamont Paris, who's trying to see what your team's going to look like this year or next season. Can you plan on Miles Studi being a part of that? You have to wait until the NCAA makes up its mind on something, and it could be next week. It could be in 4 weeks. It could be in a couple months. There's no telling how long that this process can really drag itself out. And then as it pertains to Jordan Butler has told, he told myself, Jack Feltry, he's going to be back next year. Cam Scott is the one where he told some of the people in that media room that he's planning on coming back. I would wait a little bit before taking the victory lap on Cam coming back, solely because after a game like that where he actually played well, let's not get it twisted here. Cam played maybe one of his more productive games in a Gamecock uniform in this finale against Arkansas at Bridgestone Arena. He had 8 points, was 2 for 2 from 3, and those were 2 really big threes when the team needed it, when they're trying to mount this comeback. So, they were able to get a lot out of him today. From what I've been able to gather, there might be better opportunity for him to play elsewhere. It's a real possibility. I don't want to sit here and definitively say that he's gone or that he's not, but I would give him a little more time, especially after the way the season ended. The emotion of being in that locker room with the guys that you spend every day with for the last few months, getting ready for the season and in the middle of the season, and obviously what they've gone through as a team, by losing your first 13 SEC games, having to rally just to get a couple of wins, and go through the adversity they did with losing Miles for the season, for losing Jamari for a couple weeks, for having some just heartbreaking losses. The emotion of being in that locker room once the game ends maybe having something to do with how he's reflecting on it right now, but I'd give that time. Would love to see him in a Gamecock uniform next year because I'm a Cam Scott truther. I have not given up on that kid just yet. I saw what he did at the high school level, at the AAU level, against elite high school competition, and the kid got buckets. I know that athlete is in there somewhere for Cam Scott. So hopefully, he can get another year in a Gamecock uniform and be able to help supplement this roster a little bit. But time will tell on that. I say we just put a pin in that and we wait to hear from him and see what that decision ultimately looks like. Moving on for the rest of this team, one thing that I definitely wanted to mention about this game and the way they lost is that this is really a perfect microcosm of the season. If you want to sum up what South Carolina basketball was in the year of our Lord 2024-2025, look no further than playing a game that you're an underdog in. You scratch, claw, you make a big run, a big push, and ultimately it comes down to just a handful of plays in the last couple minutes of the game, and you're just not able to get the big bucket. You're not able to get the key rebound or maybe the key stop as well as you might have played through large stretches of that game, and you still lose a game by 5 points or less. As the final tally here, in terms of what this team has done in close losses, we will read it off, and this may be painful for some because we're going down a pretty bad memory lane. You lost the first game of the year to North Florida. That was a 3-point loss. You end up pulling out a win against Clemson in a close game, a 3-point win, but then a lot of the other close games you played the rest of the year, you're just not able to pull out. Auburn at home was a 3-point loss. You had a shot to potentially tie it at the buzzer. Morris Ugasuk just missed it, even though it was a clean look. You lost by the exact same score at Vanderbilt later that week. In a game in which you turned the ball over 25 times and still found a way to be within 3 points on the road against an NCAA tournament team. You lost because of an offensive rebound putback with less than a second left and an and one. You lost to Florida by 1 point, a game in which you led the entire game with the exception of the final 4 seconds after your large lead was dwindled away because of an inability to handle the press. You lost the next game at home to Mississippi State in overtime by 5. Texas A&M at home was a 4-point loss in a game in which Wade Taylor, who is a high-volume three-point shooter who's not an efficient one, hit 7 of his 10 three-point attempts. And then the Ole Miss game, you lost by 4, in which a couple of players on that Ole Miss team that are not three-point shooters were shooting the lights out. So that's another 4-point close home loss. Finally got wins against Texas and Arkansas. Those were not 1-point game or one-possession games. And then you lost a game at Tennessee in which you actually surprised the country by going, I guess for the most part, going in a competitive nature against that team and being able to put up 65 against the defense. I don't think you're going to score 65 points against. But that's the microcosm of the season. Those were all the close games in this past year, with the exception of the Clemson game. You lost all of them. And last year, you were winning all of them. This is a bad year, and I've said this a lot this season. This is a bad year to be a slightly above average team in terms of Division I basketball, all of Division I basketball. It's not a good year to be an average team in the best conference in the history of college basketball because, statistically speaking, according to Ken Palm efficiency numbers, this is the most efficient conference in the history of the sport, or at least dating back to the 1997 when the database was formed. But there's a really good chance that they break the record. And by a good chance, after tonight, I think they do break the record for most teams in an NCAA tournament. It was 11 by the 2011 Big East Conference. I think this league gets 13 in. I think 13 teams are solidly in, and we're really just waiting to see what Texas does. And I'll get into that in just a moment. But this is a historically great league, a historically deep league. And it's a bad year to be an average to maybe even slightly above average at times team. And when you lose all those close games, that shows you how fine the margins are and what maybe the gaps are from being average to good and from good to great. It can be a handful of possessions. And that's really just the mantra of the South Carolina season. Very unfortunate way for it to go out. But the season does end with a final record of 12-20, just 1 year after breaking the school record for wins in a season. Other games that happened, though, I will be here all week covering this SEC tournament. And, of course, my coverage brought to you by our friends over at Columbia Craft and Peak Drift Brewing. I am just, a massive fan, and really the best way to be able to go about doing this whole exercise is, of course, to have a cold Columbia Craft, famously hop IPA. I actually bought an extra 6-pack before I left and hit the road to come here to Nashville. So I'm a firm believer in the product. And, of course, Columbia Craft and Peak Drift, two leading brands producing award-winning craft beer in South Carolina. They win real awards, and they win the arbitrary awards that I give to them as well. And I give them all the awards. So the next game of the day, too, Texas and Vanderbilt. A 13-seed Texas ended up beating Vanderbilt and led really wire to wire. I didn't get to see as much of this game because I was hopping on with Jay Phillips, so I can do, my day job. And so I was able to catch a lot of it. And the big thing here, the biggest takeaway for me, is that Texas was able to win a game in which they didn't need Trey Johnson to go, totally bananas in the second half. They didn't need him to score 30 points. They got some balance. This Texas team actually had 4 players in double figures, and that's the one hang-up I've had on this Texas team this year, is that I thought they're a little too reliant on a freshman guard to score all their points and create all their offense. Trey Johnson, of course, the SEC Freshman of the Year, rightfully so. He's going to be a top 5 or 6 NBA draft pick, and I think he's really the best overall scorer in this upcoming NBA draft. Didn't shoot particularly well today. I mean, he was 6 of 19 from the field, 3 of 10 from 3. Ended up with 19 points, but Tremont Mark, who for Texas came up big against Mississippi State, in a game they really had to have on the road just to keep themselves on the bubble. Last week, Tremont Mark had a really big game, and he was kind of the Robin to Trey Johnson's Batman that they've needed. And Tremont Mark today was 9 for 11 from the free throw line, got to the line a lot. Jordan Pope pitched in 14. That's an experienced college basketball player that played great minutes and had great moments at Oregon State. And then Arthur Kaluma had 11 as well. Arthur Kaluma is a guy, listen, that even in his days at Creighton and in his 1 year at Kansas State, I thought the guy was a legitimate NBA draft candidate, like a first-round guy. I love the way he's able to score, how versatile he is in his offensive game, and he's come to Texas and has been a little underwhelming from the scoring spot. He's been underwhelming where the role that Rodney Terry's put him in. That's one of the reasons why I think Rodney Terry's on the hot seat, because he's had such a talented team, an experienced talented team, and just hasn't maximized their talent and their depth and everything that they have. And surprisingly, Julian Larry only played 4 minutes today. I'm not sure if that's an injury thing or not, but a big win for for Texas against Vanderbilt because they need it. I was on the record on our show this week saying that if Texas wants to make the NCAA tournament, they want to get that at large, they must, and I mean they must, play on Championship Sunday. If they don't, they're going to be the odd team out. which if you finish 14th in your league, you probably should be the odd team out. You probably shouldn't be too disappointed about your fate. So Texas was able to pull away a win today, and even though they led by 18 points, 8.5 minutes to go in the game, Vanderbilt got it down to maybe a 2-possession game late, and they did it by a lot of getting to the free throw line. Chris Mignon, a guy who's been a real X factor for Vanderbilt in a couple of their key wins this year, got to the line 12 times. Jason Edwards got to the line 9 times. Getting to the line was really the key of this game, too. And one stat to note, these teams combined to shoot 64 free throws in this game. It was a total foul fest, a lot of free throws. If you love free throws and watching dudes stand at the charity stripe and shoot free throws all day, then my brothers and sisters, I got a game for you. It's this Texas Vanderbilt game. A lot of free throws. And when it came down to just who hit a higher percentage of them, Texas hit 73.5%. They hit 25 free throws, and Vanderbilt only hit 21, which is 70%, and that made the difference. After that game, so Texas is moving on to play Texas A&M. Worth noting. And then Arkansas, by beating South Carolina today, plays the 1 Eastern time game tomorrow against Ole Miss to kick off tomorrow's action. So then following that will be Texas A&M. And again, A&M, a team I'm very high on because their physicality, their ability to rebound and play defense. They're going to go up against Texas, and Texas is going to have to beat an arch rival in order to keep their NCAA title hopes alive. The first game of the night session, it's not much of a game. There's really not a ton to go over here, but Mississippi State dominates LSU 91-62. LSU had less than 0.7 points per possession in that first half. For those unfamiliar with that metric, it's bad. It was really, really bad. And Mississippi State forced them into a ton of mistakes in this game. The biggest takeaway is, one, Josh Hubbard had a Josh Hubbard game. I think Mississippi State offense sometimes lives and dies a little bit too much on whether or not Josh Hubbard is shooting effectively, because he's a high-volume shooter. He's not an efficient shooter. Sometimes if you want Josh Hubbard to get you 25 to 30 points, he needs to take 25 to 30 shots, and a lot of those are going to be threes. But tonight he was 6 of 12 from the three-point line. He was in a groove, and he was in a groove because I think LSU played a little soft on him. They didn't pressure the ball very well. I think he was able to really dictate the type of shots he got in this game. And the X factor for this team is Cam Matthews. I know Claudell Harris had a really good scoring day too, but Cam Matthews, in terms of guys who don't need to score the basketball to make massive impacts, Cam Matthews is up there with, Jemai Mashack at Tennessee, or JoJo Tugler from Houston, Ian Shefflin at Clemson, that same ilk of player. Texas A&M was like 3 of those dudes. But Mississippi State's Cam Matthews had 3 steals in the first half, ended up with 4 in the game. And I asked Chris Jans about the impact that Matthews has on this team that maybe people don't see, because if you're just looking at box scores, you're not going to understand the greatness of what Cam Matthews does for this team. Gets a lot of steals because he's active in passing lanes. He's really good at digging and help and not leaving his man. And today, the one thing or the words that Chris Jans used to mentioned to describe him, he's the motor and the engine of the team. And it's more even than just what he brings on the defensive side of the ball, too. He's freakishly athletic. He's got incredible defensive instincts, and that makes a world difference for a team that, ever since Chris Jans took over that job at Mississippi State, has identified with how they play on the defensive side of the floor. That is where they want to make their bread and butter. This year, it's been a little disappointing compared to the last couple of years, but the offense has been so much better that it hasn't resulted in a net negative in terms of like wins and losses. But one thing Cam Matthews does that Chris Jans said after the game is he's the guy that's in the huddle talking all the time. He's the guy that is taking ownership of the team in practices, and the guy that's keeping Chris Jans, the head coach, calm and composed on the sidelines when things can start to get a little awry, when the adversity hits and Chris Jans needs somebody to check him a little bit. Cam Matthews is that guy. And so he provides a lot on this team that just doesn't show up in box scores. One thing you can't see in a box score is he had 4 steals, and those 4 steals turned into Mississippi State points. LSU had a really hard time recovering. They had nothing offensively in this game. And defensively, there really was nothing keeping Josh Hubbard away from getting to his spots and shooting open jumpers. There was nothing defending the back line, defending the dunker spot. And at the end of the game and in garbage time, I think Mississippi State put on an absolute clinic on how to throw lobs to the players in the dunker spots and just played alley-oop games for the last few minutes of the game. It was an absolute total beatdown. And Mississippi State, it poses the question: is Mississippi State back to the national title dark horse, not title dark horse, Final Four dark horse that a lot of people thought they might have been at the beginning of the season before they really hit a wall? They lost 4 or 5 coming into this. I don't think it's that. Watching this game, I think it is more LSU struggling to defend. It's more LSU struggling to move the ball around the perimeter without turning it over. We're getting the ball in the paint. They can't even get paint touches at a reasonable rate. LSU is a train wreck, and if there's any consolation prize for South Carolina Gamecock fans, it's that you didn't go out sad. LSU went out sad. They trailed by 30-plus at one point in this game. It was, after the 10-minute mark maybe of the first half, it wasn't particularly competitive. It was a really bad way for LSU to go out. The nightcap, though, this was the most exciting game. This was a back-and-forth matchup. It had a lot of fantastic three-point shooting. Oh, and before I move on to that, just a reminder, Mississippi State will play 7 o'clock tomorrow against Missouri, 17 Missouri. So Mississippi State, Missouri could be a really good game. Missouri took them to the woodshed in Starkville the last time they played. I don't know if it's going to be that big of a blowout, but I do favor Missouri. I think Missouri's just a really tough matchup for them. But going on to the Oklahoma-Georgia game tonight, 81-75, Oklahoma wins, and did it in really impressive fashion. I think the key thing I took away from talking to players and coaches after this game was Oklahoma's small ball, where they played 4 guards, 1 big, whether it be Muhammad Wagi or maybe even Jalen Moore, who really spaces the floor even better because Jalen Moore is a knockdown three-point shooter if left open, that it gave Georgia's defense, which is primarily rooted in loading up on the ball side, protecting the paint, blocking shots. Georgia's one of the best shot blocking teams in the country, and that's because Asa Newell is on the back line of that defense, and that guy has go-go gadget wingspan and can, with his freakish athleticism, block any shot in his radius. So and we saw that happen at South Carolina when the last home game of the year at CLA, Georgia just completely eliminated any option South Carolina wanted near the rim, and that's why they stalled out offensively enough to not be able to really get over the hump and try to get back in that game. Tonight, Oklahoma did a fantastic job with Jeremiah Fears as the primary ball handler in a ball screen, and with the other players out on the perimeter to get to his spots. He snake dribbles about as well as anybody else, which is where you use the ball screen, you kind of act like you're going to the short corner, and then dribble back into the paint. I mean, he got a lot of 15-foot floaters, 50-foot jumpers. He finished around the rim really well. And when I asked Jeremiah Fears after the game how he's able to finish around the rim against a team like Georgia, which is filled with athletic bigs who block a ton of shots, and Jeremiah Fears, who is giving up a lot of size in those matchups, was saying that Porter Moser's biggest message to him in terms of preparing him for this game, and the thing he has hounded him on when it comes to playing a team like Georgia, is to go off 2 feet. That was the big adjustment. So if you go back and watch a lot of Jeremiah Fears' buckets around the basket, he's going off 2 feet and in a lot more control of his body, being able to finish through a little bit more contact and be able to maybe not have his shot altered by the length of Georgia's defenders. That was a really impressive game from him tonight. 29 points, a 29-point game. And for a guy who's not a lights-out three-point shooter, this year he hasn't even been considered a good three-point shooter, making less than 30% of his threes. Tonight, he was 4 of 7 and made his first 4. This Oklahoma team hit 10 of their first 15 three-point attempts, and for the game were 12 of 25, 48%. And what Mike White was telling me after the game is the reason that small ball is so troubling for them was because if they made different adjustments, they were still going to get beat, right? He mentioned if they stay home and they try to stop the drive and the dive too much, they converge in the paint, then it's going to leave up more open threes. If they close out too aggressively, then they're going to give up more layups with the way Oklahoma was putting the ball on the deck. If they, I'm trying to think of the best way to word this. If they focus too much on Muhammad Wagi, who had a fantastic night tonight, on the short roll, or on the dive to the basket from the ball screen from Fears, they focus too much on the dive to the basket and try and take that away. Wagi was having a fantastic night passing the ball, had 4 assists in this game as a big man, at finding the corner three-point shooters and the three-point shooters for Oklahoma, which they do have a lot of. Bryson Goodines, a lights-out three-point shooter. Jalen Moore is a lights-out three-point shooter, a big that plays like a guard, and sometimes you can maybe play lineups where Jalen Moore's the 5, and that gives you a lot of lineup versatility. It gave Georgia a ton of trouble because there was just no way to stop what Oklahoma was doing. It probably felt like they were playing whack-a-mole. You get one problem stopped, and then you have another one arise. Stop, another one arise. And that's exactly what guarding Oklahoma was like for them. For Georgia tonight, though, too, the real stretch of this game that was the killer was a 16-0 run. Oklahoma went on a 16-0 run where in that run, Silas Demery was on the bench. At that point in time, Silas Demery had 22 points when he picked up his 4th foul, a little over 5 minutes left in the game. A 16-0 run put the nail in the coffin. And during that run, Georgia's offense got a little stagnant. They were Mike White kind of talked about if there were any regrets that he had. It was not getting the ball to Asa Newell enough and maybe not using the size advantage they had well because, again, Oklahoma was playing a small ball lineup. He attributed some of the turnovers they had on charges by just being too aggressive and trying to exploit that size mismatch, but maybe not being as direct with wanting to get the ball to Newell down the post and trying to exploit that mismatch. And even with that regret that Mike White has, it wasn't like Asa Newell had a bad night, and that's why he regretted it. I mean, he still or wasn't even productive. Asa Newell was very productive. He had 21 points, 17 rebounds. That's a monster night, and had 8 of those being offensive. And really, when Georgia struggled at times in spurts in the first half, Asa Newell grabbing offensive boards was the big difference maker to keep them scoring points. But ultimately, the big difference, a 16-0 run by Oklahoma, in which the small ball lineup gave Georgia a lot of trouble. And it gave them enough trouble to where when Mike White's talking about it after the game, I genuinely believe that if any team that does have a lot of shooters and plays small ball, plays them in the NCAA tournament, they might run into the same issue. I think what Oklahoma might have done against a team that's won 4 straight coming into tonight was provide a blueprint on how to be able to handle their size and their aggressiveness at protecting the rim and protecting the paint. That's something to watch for, and that's going to really be dependent on the draw Georgia gets in the NCAA tournament because Georgia is in the NCAA tournament. The loss they had tonight against Oklahoma is technically considered their worst loss on the resume, and that's not a bad loss. Not on a neutral floor in the conference tournament. So Oklahoma's going to move on to play Kentucky, which is juicy because Otega Owe, former Oklahoma player, is now transferred to Kentucky and has been their leading scorer this year. Kind of got a little chippy after the horn. Last time they played in Norman, where he had a shot with less than 6 seconds left, Kentucky was able to pull that win at Oklahoma. And of course, he chirped a lot with his former teammates. Guys had to be separated after the horn. This was just about a week or so ago, and now they get to play the nightcap tomorrow night. I'll go and run through tomorrow's matchups. I'll pick a winner for each one. For Arkansas, Ole Miss, the big thing is, can Arkansas generate enough offense on turnovers? They thrive on scoring on the fast break, especially when their offense gets stagnant. Can they create enough turnovers against an Ole Miss team that is top 10 in the country in turnover rate? At one point this year, they were number 1. Ole Miss did have a game against Kentucky this year where they had 24 assists and 1 turnover. Ole Miss is mature, and they move the ball well, and they are very safe with how they move the ball. They're risk-averse. Ole Miss is a team that I can totally see not turning the ball over a lot in this game and limiting Arkansas' scoring capabilities, especially considering how much better this Ole Miss team has defended this season. All Chris Beard teams are good defensive teams. I like Ole Miss to win this one, probably about 10 or 11 points. I think they win it going away. Texas A&M. Now, Texas will be the most desperate team, but my thing with Texas is I do think there is a little bit of a softness to them. And if you shut down Trey Johnson and you need other guys to step up and score, they did it today against Vanderbilt. Can they do it again on no days rest against a team that is here to beat you up? If there is a team that most resembles a football team in terms of their physicality, it is the Aggies of Texas A&M. I don't foresee Texas being able to be competitive on the boards enough. Wade Taylor has shot well in this gym before at Bridgestone Arena. I think he'll get his. And I think Anderson Garcia is a mismatch for some of the defensive players for Texas because he can draw them out a little bit because of his ability to handle the ball. And Solomon Washington the same way. They have a lot of really good glue guys, a lot of good defensive guys. I know this is a little chalky, but I like Texas A&M to beat Texas probably by 7. I think this game's going to be won in the margins. It's going to be won in the glass. And Texas A&M's just going to do all the little things that it takes to be able to win this game. And then Mississippi State, Missouri. Missouri's my dark horse to win this whole thing. I think really the only team that I expect to be potentially competitive or have the best chance of winning tomorrow that's a lower seed is Oklahoma. But when it comes to Mississippi State and Missouri, I think Missouri's good enough defensively to take Josh Hubbard out of the game. And I don't know, and they can run with Missouri. Mississippi State can. My biggest question here is who is getting the bucket for Mississippi State if Josh Hubbard's shot's not falling? Now, if Hubbard's knocking down threes, they're going to make this thing really interesting. But how are they going to be able to generate offense when someone like Tony Perkins, the point guard they got from Iowa, who's been fantastic this year for Missouri, is locking him down defensively? Or he's going to be a lot more aggressive with his ball pressure. Missouri moves the ball so well. They have so many different ways of being able to score that even if Mississippi State plays the defensive performance like they did tonight, I still trust Missouri to get the shots they want. I still trust them to get a ton of buckets. So I lean Missouri there. Missouri's probably going to win that one by 9. I'll say Missouri by 9. And then Oklahoma, Kentucky. Kentucky's so hard to predict, man, because they're not an aggressive defense, so they don't force turnovers. And sometimes you can get easy shots on them if you play a really good pick-and-roll type deal. Oklahoma plays a really good pick-and-roll game, and that's why Oklahoma was in the game in Norman. That's why the game was so close. That's why it took an Otega-Oweh jumper with 6 seconds left to be able to escape Norman with a win. I might put Kentucky on upset watch tonight, officially. I think Oklahoma's got a little juice to them right now. They proved something to me tonight. Muhammad Wagi did a great job doing the little things. And I got to pick one upset here. It can't be all chalk. So I'm going to pick one upset. The upset's going to be Oklahoma getting their revenge on Otega-Oweh. Kentucky's going to have to really guard that spread ball screen. And if there's an offense equipped to go toe-to-toe with an offense like Oklahoma's who, when clicking, can do what they did tonight, it is Kentucky's. But, again, Kentucky, no Kirk Risa, no Jackson Robinson. Both fellas out for the year. The Jackson Robinson loss is massive considering he's been a productive player for them this year. So I don't trust him enough to get enough stops. I think I feel a Jeremiah Fears postseason run happening. It's going to be a home game for Kentucky because Big Blue Nation always travels, and Bridgestone Arena is essentially Rupp down south. But from a basketball matchup, I don't love it for Kentucky. I still won't be surprised if they won, and I'm not taking a big L if they do because that's a team is one of the top 5 best offenses in college basketball. I think this game is going to have the most entertainment value because, A, the storyline of Otega-Oweh and the juice that happened when the horn sounded and people got in each other's faces and had to be separated. B, the style of offenses they play, a lot of spread ball screens, a lot of 4 out, 1 in, a lot of really modern stuff. Kentucky runs so much zoom action that it's just fun to watch. They generate so much offense from that. It's going to be a high-scoring game. It's probably going to have the most entertainment value. Like, if you're going to only watch one game tomorrow in the SEC tournament, tune in 25 minutes after Mississippi State, Missouri ends, Oklahoma and Kentucky. That bad boy is going to be box office. Don't be surprised if Oklahoma pulls off the win. Thanks for hanging out with me tonight. For those who were able to tune in and watch this live, I know it's very late. Thank you for being a night owl. Thank you for being a hoop head. Thanks for hanging out with me this afternoon. And hope you guys enjoy this whenever this goes up on our YouTube page afterwards. And, of course, all my coverage here in Nashville for the SEC tournament, arguably the greatest conference tournament anyone's ever seen. People are saying it. People are saying it. That is brought to you by our friends over at Columbia Craft and Peak Drift, 2 leading brands producing award-winning craft beer in South Carolina. That's their words, and it's correct. And my words are best beer in town, man. Columbia Craft's famously hopped IPA. It's how I wind down a lot of nights. That's my nightcap. It's a perfect one as a craft beer snob myself. The famously hopped IPA is the Elijah Campbell beer of choice. It is tonight. I hope you guys can maybe crack one open yourselves. Enjoy all the basketball tomorrow. I'll be doing the exact same thing when all the action ends and I get back here to the hub. I'm going to break down all the action tomorrow. Continue the discussion. If anybody has any questions, feel free to chime in, and I'll try to get to them as quickly as possible in terms of South Carolina, where they go from here with their season ending. So one more final run through. Arkansas beats South Carolina 72-68. They play Ole Miss tomorrow. Texas beat Vanderbilt 79-72. They got Texas A&M tomorrow. LSU gets trounced by Mississippi State 91-62. The Bulldogs play Missouri tomorrow. And then Oklahoma in the game of the night takes down Georgia because of 29 points from Jeremiah Fears. They win 81-75. They will play Kentucky in the nightcap. I'm Elijah Campbell. Thank you so much for joining me. Thanks to Columbia Craft and Peak Drift for allowing me to be here. Looking forward to talking to you all again tomorrow. Another fun day of hoops awaits. It's March, my friends. Buckle up.